So I think we'll begin. It's 5:30 Central Time. I know we have people from actually around the world here today. And so, hello, everyone. On behalf of the Milwaukee Area Reading Council and Central Wisconsin Reading Council and the Northeast Reading Council, we would like to welcome everyone to tonight's event as part of our series of the Sciences of Reading, featuring Dr. Peter Johnston on literacy, teaching, and children's development. We would also like to remind you that a follow-up informal Q&A to tonight's presentation will be happening next week, Thursday, April 27th, at the very same time, 5:30 Central Time. So mark your calendars. It'll be a time for you to either submit questions or ask questions in the event. You can submit any questions in advance by using the same email that provided you the Zoom link for tonight. There you will find the Milwaukee Area Reading Council's email address at the bottom, so just scroll down. Send your questions to that address, or as I said, you can just join us that night with your questions and we will engage in a conversation with Peter. So it's a glorious afternoon. I'm Kathy Champeau. I'm co-president of the Milwaukee Area Reading Council with Dr. Tanya Mertzman. And while I live in Wisconsin, through the miracle of the internet, I am able to co-host this event from Southern California. And it's a beautiful sunny day here. It's exciting to see folks who, like me, are accessing this event virtually. We have folks not only from across Wisconsin, but from California, Illinois, Massachusetts, Hawaii, New York, Georgia, Ohio, Colorado, as well as Canada. And we had someone from London register. We'll see if they're able to attend. We also have longtime friends of WSRA, including Mary Howard that signed in, Gravity Goldberg, Cheryl Dozier, and others. The three councils hosting this event are just three of the many councils in the state, which are affiliates of the Wisconsin State Reading Association. We invite you to join your local reading council if you're in Wisconsin, and if you're not already a member, by going to the Wisconsin State Reading Association's website, which is wsra.org, to find out where your local council is located. What's so great about belonging to a local council, as well as WSRA, is it gives you an opportunity to network with other educators who want to promote literacy in our state and in the country. And if you belong to one council, you can attend other council events as well. And if you're not a member of WSRA, you can also become a member on our WSRA website too. We welcome members from around the country because networking is critical. And we offer virtual events like this one and have recorded presentations and resources on our website, including research that helps us expand our understanding of literacy and children's learning. Also, if you go to our website, wsra.org, you will have a sneak peek into our upcoming 2024 WSA conference, which will be held February 8th through 10th at the Wisconsin Center in Milwaukee. And it's entitled Engage, Explore, Enjoy, Elevating the Teaching of Literacy to Meet the Diverse Needs of Our Students. The WSRA conference is recognized as one of the best in the country because of the caliber and diversity of speakers who present a wealth of knowledge about the complexities of literacy learning. Many are award-winning researchers, like our guest tonight, and practitioners focusing on equity, the sciences of reading, and the complexity of literacy. Go to our website for more information. We are currently accepting conference proposals, so please consider submitting a conference proposal at wsra.org. So, here's what we know. Literacy is complex because our kids are complex. Because our students are not homogeneous, their needs are not exactly the same. Our mission is to deepen our understanding of how we meet the literacy needs of all of our diverse students. So tonight, award-winning researcher, Dr. Peter Johnston, will do just that. Help us understand the complexity of literacy learning. Peter's Vita is so extensive, so I am only going to give you a glimpse into his expertise. First, Peter is a professor emeritus at the State University of New York, Albany. He has received like mega recognitions for his research, including the Albert J. Harris Award from the International Reading Association for his contribution to the understanding of reading disability, the State University of New York's Chancellor's Award for excellence in research. The Literacy Research Association honored him with the Oscar Causey Award for outstanding contributions to reading research. The P. David Pearson Scholarly Influence Award, citing his book Choice Words, which many of you are very familiar with, and now it's in 4 languages and over 250,000 copies in print, as having demonstrably and positively influenced literacy teaching in classrooms and districts nationally. He's a member of the Reading Hall of Fame, and he has 2 new books out: Engaging Literate Minds, Developing Children's Social, Emotional, and Intellectual Lives K-3, published through Stenhouse. And his latest one, Teens Choosing to Read, Fostering Social, Emotional, and Intellectual Growth Through Books. And that's published from Teachers College Press. And one last tidbit, he is currently working on a revision to Choice Words. Yay! Peter is a longtime friend of WSRA and has presented numerous times at our conferences and institutes, but now spends his winters down under in Tasmania, where he has family, and in New Zealand, where he is from. But we are thrilled we are able to snag him for tonight's event. I believe he's in New York now currently. But most importantly, if you have ever interacted with Peter, you know he is simply a very generous, unassuming, kind, funny, knowledgeable, and thoughtful individual who is a huge champion of teachers and kids. So Peter, take it away.
Well, I think the prudent thing to do now would be to leave before I sully my reputation. Excuse me. This is the topic I've chosen here is kind of a big one. So anyway, human development and literacy learning are complex, and both of them are thoroughly intertwined, and sometimes in subtle ways. I was listening to an interview recently with Kate Camillo, you know, children's book author, 16 awards, 2 Newberys, so on. She reported that as a child, her best friend read Charlotte's Web over and over again. Grown up, she asked her why, you know, whether she thought that it would turn out differently on the next reading, you know, maybe Charlotte wouldn't die. Her friend's response was this: no, it wasn't that. I kept reading it not because I wanted it to turn out differently or thought that it would turn out differently, but because I knew for a fact that it wasn't going to turn out differently. I knew that a terrible thing was going to happen, and I also knew that it was going to be okay somehow. I thought that I couldn't bear it, but then when I read it again, it was also beautiful, and I found out that I could bear it. That was what the story told me. That was what I needed to hear, that I could bear it somehow. And I thought, well, isn't that part of children's development right there? It's sort of literacy, but it's also children's development more broadly. I remember when my kids were young, I would read them the Gunny Wolf by Wilhelmina Harper, and you know, there's the wolf in the forest chasing a little girl, you know, hunka-cha, 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 and little girl running away, pit-pat, pit-pat, pit-pat. And the whole thing of building up that fear, really, but in a controlled circumstance that allows kids to engage and deal with their emotions. And Gay Ivy and I, working with 8th grade kids, most of whom were choosing books that many would think of as kind of dark. One observed, said, I heart you, you haunt me. I don't know. My friend died a couple of months before that. And then, like, I just wanted to read books about suicide and all that stuff. She was my best friend. And once I read that, I got my anger out and stuff. This also seems to me to be relevant to children's development. A surprising number of children experience trauma, death of a family member or friend, divorce, and the books brought them, a sense of managing the feelings that come along with that, and also gave them a sense of gratitude for their own lives and provoked a reflection on their own identities and narrative trajectories. They also changed the way that they lived their lives. For example, one of them said, the other day I saw people on Facebook picking on this one girl, like saying nobody liked her because she was ugly and had no friends. And I kind of put a stop to it. I told them it was wrong and that people would commit suicide for it all the time. So reading these books changed my way of seeing things. Normally I wouldn't have said anything to stop, but now if I see anything, I stop it. Now, wouldn't that also constitute development in the broader sense, both in literacy, and more generally? And students like this one even began to realize that they could use books to take control of their own development. We've also heard similar things from elementary school children. Now, I wanted to start with these observations just to say that literacy, learning, and human development are linked, often in complex ways, and literacy learning is about more than, well, recent public conversations make it seem. So I'd like to spend a little time unshrinking literacy teaching and learning. In the last couple of years, in the name of science, people have been shrinking literacy to being almost solely about identifying words, with instruction in phonics running beyond elementary school and completely dominating early literacy. But even the touchstone researchers that people use to justify highly structured phonics programs don't support what's been going on. Let me show you what I mean. Mark Seidenberg at Wisconsin-Madison and colleagues have some comments on phonics and teaching reading in their writings. These are direct quotes. Avoid a narrow focus on phonics. Beyond simple cases such as the pronunciation of vowels and consonant-vowel-consonant syllables, it's not clear what the rules are or even which words are rule governed. Worse, it's unclear how students master the rules, given that only a subset of them can be explicitly taught. Computational analyses of the performance of various learning procedures suggest that a combination of many implicit learning events and a smaller number of well-timed and targeted explicit learning trials is highly efficient. They also have said, we know more about the science of reading than about the science of teaching based on the science of reading. What's missing is a developmental account of how they learn, information crucial for instruction. And finally, our concern is that although reading science is highly relevant to learning in the classroom setting, it does not yet speak to what to teach, when, how, and for whom at a level that is useful for teachers. Which doesn't sound like a ringing endorsement for a structured phonics program, but it does sound like the first step in solving a problem, which is recognizing that there is one. Now, another touchstone researcher is Bill Tunmer, who's written more recently with Wesley Hoover on phonics teaching. Bill is with Phil Goff. He was originally developed the simple view of reading theory, and with Wesley Hoover, they've recently revised that theory into the Cognitive Foundations framework. But here are some of the comments on phonics teaching and their model. Much, if not most, of what children learning to read in English come to know about its written orthography is acquired through implicit learning, especially knowledge of context-sensitive letter-sound correspondences that depend on position-specific constraints or the presence of other letters. Phonics instruction is useful not because of the specific letter-sound correspondences taught, which are limited in number, but because it instills in beginning readers a firm grasp of the alphabetic principle and gives them practice in looking closely at word spellings. Some explicit phonics instruction may therefore go a long way in facilitating the process by which children induce untaught spelling-sound relationships. Now, that induction requires large volumes of reading stuff. So one of the things to think about here is what it takes to get kids reading lots of stuff. Tunner and Hoover, in their writing, also point to problems with most phonics programs. First, they point out that they're teacher-centered with rigid, fixed, lockstep curricula, so they're not responsive to the great variation in children's skills, concepts, experience, and dispositions. Second, they point out that such programs assume children only acquire letter-sound patterns through explicit, systematic, direct instruction. But as they point out, there are too many patterns to learn that way, and teaching that way leads to dependency. They also point out that rather than a rigid set of phonics rules, children need to acquire what they call a set for diversity. Eleanor Gibson had referred to it that way also way back, so that they can flexibly use knowledge of letter-sound relationships. So here's what they say about their model. The model does not deal with other important factors that may indirectly impact reading acquisition. These include psychological factors such as motivation to learn to read, interest in reading and self-efficacy, and ecological factors such as the quality of classroom literacy instruction. So these seem to be exactly the issues to which teachers need answers. So here's a way to think about the problem that teachers face. It's a fact. Children arrive in school with a range of competencies and experiences with literacy, language, and life. The teacher's problem is this: how to keep the least prepared and those with the greatest challenges initiating literate activity and fully participating in a literate learning community with a sense of competence and belonging and a positive literate identity while developing their full human potential. I'd like you to just sit with that for a moment because it's a lot to digest. Now, I say initiating because otherwise teachers' work becomes a bit like the work of Sisyphus. We need kids taking control of their learning. And I say a sense of competence and belonging because these are human needs. And I've included developing their full human potential because human development and literacy development are, as I said before, intertwined. It's going to take more than a theory of the components of word reading for teachers to accomplish this. So let's think about writing for a start. Writing is missing from any of these theories and from the science of reading conversation. Either that or it's simply reduced to spelling. But writing is important, and Katie Wood-Ray and Lisa Cleveland make an interesting comment about this. Children who think they don't know how to write don't really need spelling lessons, at least not at first. They need to learn not to be afraid to try. In other words, children's acquisition of competencies are colored by their emotional experiences, like my failure to swim. Okay, I actually can swim. I can swim the length of a pool, but I'm exhausted when I get to the end of the pool. I get there quickly because there's a lot of incentive for me to get there. But my problem is that I can't let go of the breath that I took when I first got into the water. It's fear that stops me from swimming. It stops me from going and spending a whole bunch of time flailing around in the water, which is where I would learn to swim better and lose that fear. But I avoid it. And this is the kind of thing that happens to children with their literacy learning. I mean, the social and emotional life of the classroom is just as important as the intellectual life. They're thoroughly intertwined. Children's engagement, their positive relationships, their sense of agency, competence, and belonging are all causal predictors of academic achievement and well-being. It's odd that writing has been relatively absent from the theorizing around the science of reading because writing has some advantages over reading, certainly particularly at the beginning, as Randy Bomer points out. A blank page presents children with an invitation to make meaning. while reading presents them with an expectation to figure out someone else's meaning. Think about that for a second. I mean, the stress involved in young children's taking up writing is quite different from their engaging in reading. So writing is essentially working from the known, speech, to the unknown, print, which seems theoretically to be more productive a direction than in the other direction. Writing is also good for expanding phonemic awareness and the alphabetic principle. Rather than hearing the fleeting sounds in words, writing slows the rather concrete production of sound in the mouth. So if you watch young children writing, they write with their mouths. Jimi Hendrix played the guitar with his mouth, but children are going, and the sound spelling that they do, it turns out, leads to better conventional spelling. In the early stages, writing development actually outpaces reading development for quite a while. So I added this little piece here. What will this require of the teacher and of the learning community? Just to return to this statement here. Well, we have to look seriously at what we know from research on teaching and learning. I know that previous speakers in this series have addressed parts of this, but I'd like to look more broadly at how we might think about this question. I mean, first, as the researchers I referred to earlier alluded to, the fact that children arrive at school with such differences means that teachers must be responsive to those differences. Well, what does that mean? Well, this is what I think it means. A responsive teacher must know what to notice about a child's behavior, what it means, and how to respond. So that's knowing things like how a child's speech patterns and dialects explain his sound spelling, or why a child is balking at doing something. They have to know the nature of literacy in children's development. They have to have a broad understanding and a detailed understanding of that. They have to know how to engage students in literacy in ways that reveal information, build relationships, and advance academic, social, and emotional development. As I look at that line in the PowerPoint here, I confess that I jammed a lot into that, okay? But for example, they need to know how to normalize mistakes as reflective of learning and not intellect. And they have to have ways of talking about literate activity that reveal, what lies behind the behaviors. They need to arrange interactions that lead to positive relationships among children. They need to minimize interpersonal comparisons, for example. They need to know how to organize classrooms in ways that make time available to work closely with children who need focused attention. In other words, they need literate activities to be engaging enough and children to be independent enough to allow breathing room. And the classroom must be responsive too. We need theories about this as much as about, the ways words are processed and acquired. I'm obviously not going to solve this problem tonight, but I'll try to link some possible starts here that seem to me to fit together. And they also need to know how to create a responsive learning community, a classroom in which learning doesn't just depend on the adult teacher and that itself supports children's literate and human development. So I hope no one is on the video here that's a beginning teacher, because this might be a little terrifying what I just laid out here. Okay, so Jim G spent time studying children's engagement with video games. Children spend hours and hours voluntarily struggling to figure out video games. I mean, regularly failing, but not giving up. He wanted to know, how designers make games so cognitively and emotionally compelling. And this is a rough summary of what he found. He referred to these online communities as affinity spaces. And these are their characteristics. Affinity spaces are gatherings of people with the same passion that have distributed teaching and learning. I'll talk a little bit more about distributed teaching and learning in a moment, but what that means is there's no teacher there, and yet everybody's learning. that novices and experts are not segregated, and they can pursue different goals within the space depending on their own choices, purposes, and identities. They can mingle with others as they wish, learning from them when and where they choose. The community norms are supportive and encouraging with feedback, and there are many different forms of and routes to participation and competence. This is a really important piece here, because one of the problems with the current way people are pursuing literacy acquisition is that it's narrowed down to in such a way that there are very few ways for people to participate and demonstrate competence, particularly the kids who are later starters than others. There's an expectation that individuals take the initiative in learning, but help is offered and sought where necessary. Now, under these conditions, children spend hours of committed time struggling to figure things out without giving up. They have a continuing sense of meaningful participation. In fact, according to Edward Deci and Rich Ryan and their self-determination theory, affinity spaces meet children's basic human needs for healthy development. And that would be, oh, sorry, I missed a line here. Mistakes and problems are expected aspects of learning. Anyway, these characteristics of affinity spaces meet Deci and Ryan's basic human needs for healthy development, which are a sense of autonomy, a sense of competence. Some also talk about self-efficacy, a sense of relatedness or belonging, and meaningfulness or meaningful participation. And there's a lot of research behind self-determination theory. People worry about giving kids autonomy. Well, they fear chaos and tend to invoke the metaphor of herding cats, but these people haven't heard of a can opener, or in the case of dry cat food, storing it in a tin to amplify the sound of food. So how do we transfer this idea to literacy? I have three particular experiences with affinity spaces that are consistent with G's model and with larger fields of research that I'd like to talk you through. The first is, and this is shameless self-promotion here, but this is the one of the books that Kathy referred to earlier that came out last year, the year before, something like that. Anyway, and you'll note that she's a second author on this. Anyway, this first is from, my work with Kathy and these other wonderful classroom, K3 classroom colleagues, in which we explored their teaching in this book. So some of the work was based on the work of Katie Wood-Ray, Lisa Cleveland, and Matt Glover, the heart of which was, inviting children to make books. Basically, you read books to the children, pointing out various features of the books, inviting them to notice other things and casting the things that they are noticing as intentional moves made by the people who made the books. And then you say, hey, you want to make some books? And you treat any efforts that they make in the same way as you treat the books by commercial authors. And as you and the children notice new things about books, you imagine with them why authors would use this or that strategy and how they might use it. And you invite them to try it if they find it useful. Imagining what goes on in authors and illustrators' minds, their intentional decisions, is powerful because it shows them the tools of the trade in action. It helps them see exactly how to live into authors and illustrators' lives and to take up those identities. It also encourages children to initiate literate activity and to act strategically. Getting children to initiate literate activity is noticeably absent from many of the approaches to literacy instruction that we encounter lately. Now, because different kids will try different strategies, a range of strategies become part of the community knowledge to be drawn on as kids talk about their work with each other, which they do. At the start, most kids take up the invitation to make books. They like making stuff. Others will initially watch, but further invitations and observation, and they'll try their hand too. They're all identified with evidence as authors and illustrators. Sharing their work as authors is a particularly important motivating force. a piece that is often shared in the haste of classroom life, but it really matters that they get to share their work. So, so are our comments like, this is just like how Mo Willems did it in Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus. So we're particularly careful to notice and celebrate approximations, anything that bears some resemblance to an intentional literate practice. Their identities as authors motivate them. Not only that, identities sustain and focus their attention and organize their activity. It really matters that they take up those identities. The long-term project of making books builds self-regulation and executive function. When children are making books of their own design and interest, they're trying to accomplish something concrete and meaningful, so they act strategically. And where there's a will, there's a way. No will, no way. The community of authors brings additional meaning to reading, and it sustains small group meetings to inquire into particular aspects of literacy, including phonics. Because children are fundamentally social and free to engage with each other while working on their projects, they learn from and with each other. This is what G refers to as a distributed teaching and learning system. Really, it's capitalizing on children's socialness. There are two additional important features. One I already mentioned, and that's noticing. At the beginning of the year, we point out to kids that they can learn anything. They just have to notice things. And we invite them to do so. And when they do, we briefly capitalize on what they've noticed. We encourage them to notice things about words, for example. And this has a number of advantages. First, it puts the children in control of their learning, and it makes instruction more responsive. Second, the more people notice about things, the more they like them. Ellen Langer tried this with adults. She got them to do things they didn't care for, like watching football, listening to classical music or rap, looking at art and stuff like that. She told them to notice, one group to notice 3, another group to notice 6, another group to notice 9 new things about the activity. Turns out the more you notice, the more you find you like the activity. Same with kids. Incidentally, noticing is also the foundation for mindfulness, the benefits of which have shown up in a lot of research. The second thing we tell the kids at the beginning of the year is that they're all teachers. When we catch them acting strategically, which is easy to do when they're engaged, and we explain to them the strategy we saw them use and why it's important, then we say, hey, do you want to teach the other kids that strategy? Which we help them do. And when we catch them helping a peer learn something, we celebrate it. That expands the distributed teaching and learning system. This is exactly what G described with the affinity spaces. Kids all have the same passion, making books. They all are busy working on their own projects, which is autonomy. The multimodal nature of the activity means that the ways to be a successful participant are many, which allows even the least developed to have a sense of competence. And kids find each other interesting because they're all doing different stuff. So their conversations lead to positive relationships. Because they're all engaged, the teacher has space to work with small groups and individuals. Because it's an engaged community, when an individual loses engagement, he finds the others are busily engaged, and pretty soon he gets back into being engaged. Also, we choose books to read with the kids that help them think through how to live and learn together and enjoy diversity. I haven't talked about the reading side of things here, but I'd like to give you another example here. And this too is shameless self-promotion. So this second example comes from my work with Gay Ivy and a group of middle school teachers. This work is in a number of research papers, but we have this book coming out later this summer. It's not out yet, with Teachers College Press, called, Teens Choosing to Read. A group of 4 8th grade ELA teachers had been frustrated with the fact that they couldn't get many of their students engaged in reading. Well, through Gay, they read some research on engagement in reading, such as John Guthrie and Nicole Humenek's meta-analysis of engaged reading, which showed this. Well, there's more to it, but the meta-analysis, the average effect sizes on motivation to read were choice of books, 0.95, interesting texts, 1.15, collaboration, 0.52. These are massive effect sizes, and the effects on comprehension were essentially the same. Choice, 1.2, and interesting texts and collaboration. Now, in light of this, the teachers stopped assigning books to read and requiring assignments on completion. So they did as follows. They gave children choice among personally relevant books or other materials. They had about 150 to 200 books per class, and no more than 3 copies of any title, sometimes only a single copy. This is Capitalism 101, where you have a limited access to any particular title, and it becomes more valuable. Instruction was woven into the read aloud. This was a read aloud of a book that was a pretty good chance that most of the kids would find engaging. But if they were too busy with their own books, they could actually keep reading during the read aloud. They allowed time to read in class, and talk about books was encouraged, not just allowed, but encouraged. And there were no comprehension questions, only open prompts like, catch me up, or what are you thinking? And the teachers actively distributed teaching within the community. So they would do things like, if a kid was stuck with a book or was not engaged, which is kind of easy to tell when you pull up alongside them and ask what they're thinking or catch me up, pretty soon you can see if they're engaged. And then they would link them up with another student whose book, who found that to be a favorite book. And that student would have an incentive to help the first student figure out how to read it, because the one thing that students really wanted was to talk about their books. The same as any adult, if you read something really good, you just have to share it with somebody. You have to talk about it. And that's what the kids found. Of course, there's more to it than what I've listed here, which we explore in the book, but this is enough background. To put it mildly, the shift was transformative. The least interesting aspect was that students did better on the state test, but more importantly, it formed an affinity space that changed the development of the students much more broadly. And here are some of the comments from students. Like, I talked to Magdalena about what happens in the books. The books she hasn't read, I give her a little bit of info about. She can read it when she's done with her book. And some parts I have to get off my mind and talk through with her. And she helps me get through parts I'm stuck at. I'm either confused or it's bugging me. Like, then I'll go back to the book and I figure out what's happening. Then I go back and tell her about it. You know, you can see here, this is exactly what's happening with what is almost definitional of distributed teaching. Here are 2 students who are both bringing something to the interaction here, and each is learning from the other. And it's unprovoked by the teachers, really. It's just that they have to talk with each other about the books. And another kid said, before this year, we kind of had to read books they assigned to us. So I pretended to read it and I just wouldn't care about books at all. This is screams autonomy, the need for autonomy. And it, raises that question of how do we make literacy cognitively and emotionally compelling? Here's another one. I feel like I used to be a very social person and I'm not a very academic person, but I can actually have conversations about books now, which is kind of weird for me because I'm not the brightest cookie ever. Like, I struggle with my grades, but I can push myself. You can hear the 2 identities, the old identity and the new identity, sort of crunching together here as she kind of sorts this out. And what's allowed her to have this sense of, I'm actually able to participate in book conversations now, which she sees now as academic. And that's because the other kids think she is too. So there's another kid, yeah, everyone's gotten so much smarter. We always talk about books. The thing is that because in these book discussions, each kid is bringing themselves to it, something new to the other readers. And the thing that they want is other people's perspectives on this thing that they've read. So when someone brings that, they suddenly seem so smart. So it's this, in a way, students are holding up a different mirror to each other than they were previously. Here's another one. I don't know how to put it, but it's just that you get to talk between each other, and that makes you feel you can trust that person more. Now, we also see this with the younger kids when they're doing their making books and so forth. They're busy talking. They're talking about their books, but they're also talking because they're talking about the stuff they're doing in the books. And in those conversations, it changes their relationships. Now, there's another one said this, like when you talk about books, like people are all talking about the same thing, focusing on feelings and stuff like that. So everybody just seems more compassionate about things. Now, research supports this causal relationship that the student is reporting. In fact, talk about feelings and relationships and the reading of narratives expands what we'll call mind reading, the ability to imagine others' thoughts and feelings. We encourage it further by asking questions like, how do you think he feels? How will you feel? What is she thinking? Show me excited with your face. And we also, make sure that we expand students' repertoire of mental verbs and mental state language in these conversations. But it's the conversations themselves that open the vehicles, that provide a vehicle for these conversations that expand their development. Another kid said this, I think I've become more respectful to others this year for some reason. Like, I care more. Like, I don't know, it's kind of weird. Like, books, they tell you about like how some people feel. Like, I don't know if that's really how they feel, but like once I read the book, it's like these people who are being bullied, then I can tell how they feel. And then, so like, I'm more respectful to people. This sort of shift in development affects the relational life of the classroom, which has knock-on effects on other kids' development, and also their availability to learning. What was interesting with these kids is when we followed them 2 and 3 years into high school, they remembered their 8th grade year. They remembered who they had conversations with, what books they read. They remembered where they sat. They remembered their 8th grade year in Technicolor. And once they reached high school and began to be assigned books again, and not reading for most of them, in fact, their schooling turned back into grey. Now, the thing is that these conversations that the kids were having are very reminiscent of another line of research, which is dialogic engagement, which we spent a bunch of time on in the book with the younger kids. But here's what I mean by that. Dialogic engagement, there's a wide array of research on this. Robin Alexander, Dick Anderson, Neil Mercer, Alina Resnitskaya, Ian Wilkinson, a whole bunch of people. It also goes under collaborative deliberation, knowledge building, and so forth. And it's very like G's affinity spaces. First, basically, you help children set rules for participation and then shape their participation in the reading. But the basic thing is this: students and teachers share a joint collaborative inquiry with open questions. Communication and roles are reciprocal among teacher and students. So teachers have to back out and make space for students. But this is what was happening with the 8th grade teachers where they said, catch me up, or what are you thinking? So that it pulls the students into doing the talking. Students actively listen to each other and explore differences of opinion. Talk is cumulative and supportive. So kids build on each other's thinking, and they support each other's thinking. They also disagree, which is actually important, but they disagree in ways that are actually productive, which we help them learn how to do. So an uncertainty and tentativeness are valued in these classrooms. Now, we support, dialogic engagement with comments like this along the way. Things like make sure each person has a chance to say something so that your learning grows from each other. Now, you notice there's a causal relationship in there. You do this because this is what will happen. And it's in the group's interest that we make sure everyone has something to say. Who can add to that idea or work with it in some other way? So that's really what we're doing here, is building ideas, working with ideas. Addie, when you put those two ideas together for us, it helped us to understand that. So that causal relationship again, that sense of agency built in. If Steve hadn't asked what you were thinking, we wouldn't have heard from you and wouldn't have figured that out. Again, here's an assertion of that causal relationship. Again, what would we have missed if you hadn't done that? Can anyone push back against this thinking? Again, what we're inviting children to do is disagree with each other in this thinking, because as they disagree with one another, they provide the logic of their thinking, and in that logic, they provide strategies and the rationality of their thinking, and that will turn out to be important in the consequences. And if you hadn't disagreed, Rachel, we never would have thought about this. So again, even if someone disagrees and it turns out that in their disagreement they are not correct, it's the point that in doing that they pushed our thinking further. So it's not about kids become less interested in getting to the bottom of something than just getting deeper into it. Now, the thing is, these dialogic engagements, and the research on this goes down to kindergarten and all through high school, and you get the benefits all along the way, as I say, even with kindergarten kids. But these are the kind of benefits that you get. It improves children's reading, especially their comprehension, and writing abilities of all students, especially the less able. Their reasoning ability, their conceptual understanding in math, science, and so forth, their expressive language, their academic vocabulary, especially in children from underserved communities. It improves their supportive interactions and willingness to help others. It improves their perspective taking, their willingness to consider others' ideas. It improves their confidence, self-esteem, and persistence. It improves their stance toward diversity and uncertainty. It improves their evaluations of peers and increases their interest in others. It reduces children's anxiety, and children enjoy it, and it generates more interest and engagement. So students are actually able to engage in levels of thinking that they couldn't independently, while they're at the same time, they recognize that that thinking that they're doing came from thinking that they contributed. These strategies that are used by individual thinkers within these conversations become distributed among the other students. A student uses a strategy, and then presently another student will use that strategy, and then another student, and it becomes, there's a snowball effect. Now, along the way, as I say, we build children's mind reading, their ability to imagine themselves into other people's heads, other classmates, but also other characters in books, and also into writers and illustrators, authors and illustrators. So building their mind reading and perspective taking has the following benefits. They're more able to understand complex narratives and linguistic devices, and they have better comprehension. They're better able to construct arguments and detect bias. They have more positive social skills and fewer angry responses. They're more socially cooperative, more pro-social and interested in others. They have larger social networks and healthier friendships. They're viewed more positively by their peers. They misbehave less at home and at school. They have stronger moral development and they resist stereotyping. They're less likely to bully or be anxious or depressed. They have stronger attachment to peers, teacher, and class. And they have better self-regulation. And they're also more able to recognize bias. Now, all of these aspects of development influence children's ability in reading, and also they influence their availability for literacy learning. These make classroom life easier and more enjoyable, and the more positive school experiences kids have, the happier students are, and the more positive school experience they produce. So we work at expanding mind reading by normalizing the kind of talk that I mentioned earlier in here. So finally, I want you to see how all this is related to the larger context of children's development. Ellen Galinsky is the executive director of Mind in the Making, and she lists these critical areas of child development. Self-directed, engaged learning. This is child development more broadly, not particularly literacy. Perspective taking and mind reading. Communicating, social competence and living together. Learning to take on challenges and persisting. Focus and self-control. And critical thinking. Now, I think you can see how these fit exactly with all of the things that I've been describing here. So to summarize, I suggest the following. We need to contemplate how to make literacy cognitively and emotionally compelling to children, all children. Children bring different histories, experiences, and selves to literacy learning, so teachers have to be responsive, which scripted programs do not allow. Children, literacy and learning are fundamentally social. All of those are social. Narrow cognitive theories of reading do not provide an adequate framework for literacy teaching. We need to expand the way we think about literacy to offer children more ways to competently participate. In the Making Books, that offers a lot of ways to participate. When kids are reading different books and they can engage with those in different ways through conversations and so forth, those are different ways to demonstrate competent participation. We can't only focus on what an individual must learn, but how an individual within a community learns and does not. And we might pay more attention to convergences in what we do know about teaching, learning, literacy, and issues of children's development as human beings. I think Anne Haas-Dyson says it nicely. She says, as hard as the school as an institution may try to focus children's attention on the neutral basics, young children are not driven by an interest in the basics. They're driven by an interest in meaningful participation in classroom life. So that's all I got to say. And another shameless effort at self-promotion here. I'll put up these two books from which I drew in this talk here. So hopefully I'll chat with some of you next week.
Oh, thank you, Peter, so very much. The work is compelling. We hope that folks have enjoyed tonight's presentation, and you probably are brimming with tons of questions and thoughts, and just like when Peter said, you just have to talk with someone when you've read a really good book. You just have to talk with someone when you've heard some very compelling ideas and a grand presentation that Peter provided us tonight. So next week on Thursday, same time, same place, same station, it'll be the same Zoom link. So if you get a little crazy and can't find a Zoom link, just go back to tonight's, and it will be a Q&A with Peter, a chance to have a conversation. You may, if you have a question and you would like to post it on the Milwaukee Area Reading Council website, and not website, that through the email, that again, that can be found at tonight's email message that was sent out for tonight's link. You just scroll down to the bottom and you will see the email for the Milwaukee Area Reading Council. I encourage all of you to submit some questions, but you may not have a question until you start the conversation next week, and that's great too. So we're hoping that we can have some of this dialogic conversation that Peter talked about to extend our learning, and so that we can help to support the children in our classrooms. So again, the Milwaukee Area Reading Council, along with the Northeast and Central Reading Councils, thank all of you for joining us. And hopefully this has provided you with some ideas for your classroom tomorrow. And get started thinking about some of these ideas that Peter put forth. And we will see you again next week. I know in the chat there were some questions about a couple of the slides, but this will be recorded, or it is recorded, I should say, and will be available on our website. In addition, bring that question to the Q&A next week, and Peter can expand on whatever the slides were that you wanted more information. So again, we hope that it's been informative for all of you. We thank Peter, who donated his time and energy to creating this presentation just for us tonight, a customized presentation. And as I said, he's a very generous and thoughtful individual. So we want to express our deepest thanks and appreciation to you, Peter, for taking the time to be with us tonight, away from the grand afternoon in New York, and for the rest of you for
a glass of wine.
Yes, we can all go now and enjoy, as Peter and I both enjoy New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, or whatever you intend to do this evening to enjoy the rest of your day. So thanks again for all of you for joining us, and for the friends from around the world, actually, that wanted to hear Peter talk one more time. So thank you so much. We have just a couple minutes, but we'll see you next time. Go and enjoy the night with however you choose to enjoy it. Thank you.